LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation.
Good morning, everybody. Starting today, this is your brand new edition of the Nigel Farage Show. I'm going to be here every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. You now get 5 days of Farage. Don't forget, I'm still here Monday to Thursday, 7 till 8 p.m, where you get to have your say on the day's top stories. This new Sunday edition will take a closer look at the stories that have been getting you talking all this week. And importantly, we'll look ahead to what's going to make the headlines in the weeks to come. And I will be extending the invitation to come on this show to politicians from all sides of the political spectrum. I want them to come on and to have a grown-up debate on the issues that matter. I'm here to demonstrate that dialogue can remain open even if you disagree with someone's point of view. And of course, I want your views. In fact, I would say this, that on Sunday mornings, across radio and across television, there are now a mass of political and current affairs programmes. But too often, it seems to me that it's journalists talking about politicians, politicians talking about journalists, politicians talking about politicians, and even journalists talking about journalists. And whilst it's important to hear the views of our leading political and media figures, too much of the debate is inside the London bubble. That's why the most important component of this show is your reaction, whether it's via a phone call, tweet, whether it's via a text, a Facebook message. Let's get your views on the day's big stories out there, loud and clear. And today from 11 o'clock, we will talk about something coming up in a few weeks, and that is the German elections. Tonight, a big TV debate between Angela Merkel and her rival Martin Schulz. But for now, well, it has to be Brexit, doesn't it? The silly season is over. Everybody's coming back. Big parliamentary debate this week on the so-called Great Repeal Bill. And just before the show, I spoke to former Europe Minister Lord Peter Hain, and I asked him, what is the current state of the Brexit negotiations?
They're a mess. I don't see what the government's negotiating position is. David Davis is an engaging fellow, but he isn't clear what he's trying to achieve unless, and this is my fear, unless we're heading for a no-deal situation in which we get to, not very far away, a position where actually the British government says we can't do a deal and therefore we're simply exiting. That would be catastrophic. That would be the hardest of landings on Brexit. And frankly, even for an arch-Brexiteer like you, I cannot see that would be a satisfactory outcome. It would be very serious for the economy, for example.
Well, it's not what any of us on the Brexit side would desire, although the argument's been made that no deal is better than a bad deal. But it seems to me that the sticking point, and what could lead to no deal, is the size of this so-called divorce bill. Now, I mean, what do you think a reasonable settlement should be?
I have no idea, because I'm not across the detail any more than you are. And what is obvious is that we have obligations, we have liabilities for pensions, and a number of other programs which we entered into in good faith as a British government. And Britain does not break its word. If we ever started entering into that game in terms of international treaties and agreements, then we would be in a dire place and lose respect across the world. So I don't know what the figure should be, but it's clear that there is a cost to leaving, and that should be negotiated in good faith. And it's not clear to me whether Barnier is in the right or Davis is in the right on this, but actually that is not the key issue. The key issue for me is what kind of transitional phase and period we get so that we can have time to adjust to this monumental upheaval in our trading relationships. Around about half our trade is with the countries of the European Union, and you can't simply stop that on day one and then on day two be into some kind of placid new trading relationship. There has to be a transitional approach which allows adjustments to be made and now allows negotiations for new trading relationships to take place. And I think that has to be over a period of years, remaining in the single market and also in the customs union at a minimum.
But we didn't vote for that. I mean, I hear people saying, and I read your piece in The Guardian where you talked about the single market and your belief of how important it is to us, but surely isn't the real argument here that every single player on both the Remain and Leave camps during that referendum made it clear that if we voted for Brexit, we were voting to leave the single market.
That's not actually true. A lot of your fellow Brexit leaders said we should stay in the single market.
Who? Who?
But
Who? I can't think. I honestly, of the leading participants, I can't think of a single one.
If you look at a range of people, from Daniel Hannan to Boris Johnson, you'll find at one point or another they said leaving the single, and Owen Paterson was another, leaving the single market would not be sensible. And I know for a fact, having knocked on hundreds of doors on the Remain side in the referendum, that leaving the European Union, and your very telling slogan, which definitely resonated on the doorstep about taking back control, was the prime issue. People were not getting into the detail of the single market. Margaret Thatcher took us into the single market. It has been very successful for our economy.
And she later regretted doing it, didn't she? I mean, she later said she wished she hadn't.
Well, she was part of a whole historic move that was beneficial for the British economy. But that was not on the ballot paper. Leaving the European Union was, and there was a vote to achieve that. And nobody's trying to, as it were, traduce that vote. That is simply a fact we have to manage. But leaving the single market was not on the ballot paper. And why on earth would we want to do that, especially, as it were, on day two, having left on day one? That would be madness. Because for example, we are now exporting, and it's fantastic, British-made cars like Jaguar Land Rover and Nissan and so on into the rest of the European Union at a huge rate. Why would we suddenly want to face a situation where there were tariffs, there were barriers, there was a question of whether we complied in the case of cars with hundreds of pages of regulations on standards in order that our cars can simply go across the channel and be sold in every showroom from Paris to
I think the counter-argument, Peter, the counter-argument would be that we're now selling more of our motor cars outside of the European Union to the rest of the world.
And we can continue to do this.
Where we are hindered by tariffs. I mean, if we do business with a Japanese motor manufacturer selling his car into this country is subject to a 10% tariff. So
this is the fallacy of the Brexiteer position like yours. Of course, we are already selling to China and India and America and so on, and we can carry on doing that. But it would be mad to turn our back on our biggest trading partner, the other 27 countries of the European Union, as it were, on day two. We leave on day one, and on day two we're suddenly over this cliff edge into a situation where not only do we not have proper trading relationships and the same free flow that we enjoy now, which surely you should want, in the interests of jobs and prosperity right across Britain, but also we are disturbing the 50-odd other trading relationships that we are part of through the European Union.
So why doesn't Monsieur Barnier, who is taking the lead for the European Union over trade, but amongst other things, recognise that the EU is selling us about £70 billion of the goods every year, more than we're selling them? Why don't the European Union just say to the UK, OK, guys, you're leaving political union, we want to carry on with a free trade agreement? Doesn't that make sense for everybody?
Well, if we get into that discussion, then so be it. But actually, that's not where the negotiations are going now. And if that was the kind of arrangement whereby we wanted equivalent terms to those which we have now in the single market and the customs union, it's not clear to me, by the way, how that would be achieved, and I haven't seen any answer from you or anybody else on that. But if it were possible to get into that territory, well then I'm happy to have a look at it. But I do not believe that is possible to achieve by March 2019, in fact earlier than that, because there has to be a process of ratification by the 27 other European parliaments and indeed about 8 other regional ones. This process is quite difficult. The time does not permit us, especially with the enormous delays since the Brexit vote last year, delay in the negotiations.
I think this
government has been incompetent on that.
There you and I would be at one. It's taken a very, very long time.
So my point is, if you want to actually get a smooth landing, and that is in the interests of Remainers like me or Leavers like you, for the British economy to maintain jobs, to allow our exporters from Jaguar Land Rover to Nissan and many, many others in different fields, and services, by the way. We're an 80% services economy, so just staying in the customs union doesn't deal with that. You have to be in the single market or its exact equivalent to protect our services and the City of London and so on. Then you need a period of years in order to get all the other trading relationships agreed, not just with the rest of the European Union, the 27 countries, but also with the 50-odd countries that whose trading relationships we have are dependent on the negotiated arrangements through the European Union.
Well, these arguments...
Then that has to be negotiated and agreed, and that does not happen overnight. It takes a long time. The Canadian deal with the European Union's taken over 7 years.
Peter, these arguments,
and that's true right across the world.
These arguments have succeeded in your own Labour Party, where you and others have managed to change the official stance of the Labour Party, which is now to stay in the single market and the customs union for the transitional period. And
indeed,
Deputy Leader Tom Watson was hinting the other day that perhaps it could become permanent. Let me ask you, with the Great Repeal Bill to come before Parliament this week and on to the House of Lords, does the Labour Party now have a chance of beating the government and keeping us inside the single market for that transitional period?
I hope so, because I think it would be catastrophic for jobs and prosperity in the economy if we didn't do that. If we fell out of the single market and the customs union the day after we agreed to leave the European Union in around March 2019, then that would be catastrophic for the economy.
So you will, as a member of the House of Lords, vote against the government's position on this, despite them managing to form a majority government with that in their manifesto?
If you want to talk about the Salisbury Convention in the House of Lords, I'm happy to do it. That depends on a majority government, and there isn't a majority government. There's a coalition government in the House of Commons at the moment, a majority government getting elected on its manifesto, and that didn't happen. Theresa May failed to do that.
I think we can predict, Lord Hayne, exactly how you're going to vote when it comes to the crunch.
Well, I will vote in the country's interests, as I always do, particularly to protect jobs and prosperity, and making sure that if this Brexit process proceeds, it has to happen in an orderly way, and that there's a soft landing, and that there's a smooth transition over a number of years into a position where the British economy can be protected and jobs can be secured and indeed grow. And I will be voting against anything that is attempting to roller coast the bill through Parliament. For example, if there's a programme motion that doesn't give plenty of time in the Commons to scrutinise every part of this bill, which contains a lot of powers for ministers in it, which I think is anti-democratic, and I'm sure you'd agree, that Parliament should have the final say. If any of these tricks and devices are part of Theresa May's plan, as I fear they are, then I will be voting to try and stop that.
Well, that was former Europe Minister Lord Hayne, and thank you, Peter, for coming on the show and proving that civilised debate can take place between people who have polar opposite views. He has been successful in shifting the Labour Party to their new position of wanting to stay in the single market and the customs union for the transitional period. Is the Labour Party helping or hindering the Brexit process? If you think Peter Hayne is bang on with what he's trying to do, then call me on 0345 60 60 973. If you think Labour are deliberately slowing down the Brexit process, then text to 84850, or perhaps you think neither party are really doing the business on Brexit, in which case, using the hashtag Farage and LBC, tweet at LBC, and you can watch us on Facebook Live and comment there too. You're listening to the brand new Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC, and it's 10:18. Parliament is back this weekend. Yes, of course, Brexit is top of the political agenda. The Great Repeal Bill is going to be put before the House of Commons this week, and that is the means by which decades of laws that have come to us through membership of the European Union get incorporated into UK law. But there is, I think, a bit of a shift that's gone on in British politics. Now, David Davis today writing in the Sun on Sunday, the Brexit Secretary says that the Labour Party are trying to delay, bog down and defeat the repeal bill. He says in the last 14 months since Britain voted to leave the EU, Labour have put forward 10 different Brexit plans and one big mess. Well, they're great words in a newspaper, but I think David Davis actually is wrong and is behind the curve on this. I think the Labour Party have now made their minds up. No longer is it difficult to deduce how they're going to play this over the course of the coming weeks, months and indeed years. They now want us to stay part of the single market and the customs union, and you heard Peter Hain outlining the arguments why. Now this morning, speaking on the MAR programme, Shadow Brexit Secretary Keir Starmer said the following.
We've always said jobs and the economy come first. We've always said we've got to retain the benefits of the single market and the customs union. What's clear now is the clock is ticking, and we are going to need transitional arrangements. The government at one stage was pretending we wouldn't need them. That having been the case, obviously it's important that we take leadership as to what are the terms of those transitional arrangements. And what we've said is the transitional period, i.e. from March 2019 until we get to a new and final deal, will be within a customs union and within the single market. Now, and there's absolute clarity about that, and it's a united Labour Party position, I'm very glad to say. It's not a U-turn, it's a development of our policy. On the question of what are the terms of the transitional arrangements, Labour has never said anything other than that we retain the benefits of the single market and the customs union. The argument that has been there is about what the final position is, but this is a development of the policy. It's an important development, and what's really important about this summer is that Labour has got to a united and a clear position. I think that is in the public interest.
I think it's pretty clear from Keir Starmer. I think it's even clearer from what we heard earlier on from Lord Peter Hain. The Labour Party want us to stay in the single market and the customs union. It is now clear. It is settled, I think, that the Labour Party are going to provide opposition to this, both in the Commons. And I thought what Peter Hain said about the House of Lords was interesting. There is something called the Salisbury Convention, which says that the unelected House of Lords does not go against the government of the day if it has had something in its manifesto and been voted for by the public. But you heard what Hain was saying. Oh, no. The Tories didn't win the election because they didn't get a majority. Therefore, we're free to fight against them on the single market. And, of course, similarly, grave warnings being issued by Damien Green and others to those on the backbenches of the Conservative Party, the Anna Soubrys, the Ken Clarks, people like this, Nicky Morgans, because, of course, their fear will be what happens if those Tories on the backbenches who are still committed to the European project join together with Labour and the SNP. Could the government get defeated? So let's listen now to David Davis, who was also on the MAR programme this morning, and specifically he was talking about that press conference we saw earlier in the week with him and Michel Barnier. Barnier, to me, looking really pretty testy.
He can take whatever line he likes on the way we conduct the negotiations. That's up to us, not up to him. But to give you an example of progress, the need to guarantee the health care for people who are currently in Europe. We did that last week. You know, we want to extend it to everybody. We wanted the EHIC scheme, the card scheme that you take with you when you go on holiday. We want to extend it to everybody. That, have you? But we've agreed it for people in Europe, you know, the British citizens in Spain or Italy or France or wherever. That's agreed. That's done. You know, very important, incredibly important. Social Security contributions for these people, all now agreed. You know, other things which sound
there already, is it?
Yeah, this for people. They're the only thing they'll talk about at the moment. This is the point about the Europeans. They won't talk about the future. They'll only talk about so-called, well, divorce proceedings, if you like. Those things we've been resolving. What he's concerned about, of course, is he's not getting the answer on money. And they've set this up to try and create pressure on us on money. That's what it's about. They're trying to play time against money. That's exactly what they're doing.
So we've interviewed and we've heard from the big political players as the city season ends and we go back into Parliament, politics and, of course, Brexit. And now I think we've got to ask ourselves this question. Is the Labour Party, with its new position, helping or hindering the Brexit process? And now we do the most important bit. We go to you. And we start. My first caller on this new show is William from Eastbourne. William, good morning.
Good morning to you. Yes, I've just been listening to Peter Hain, who classifies himself as an expert on Brexit. Peter Hain, to my knowledge...
Well, he was the Europe Minister, William, wasn't he?
Yes, but has he ever been in business? Has he ever actually run a business at any point in his life?
Oh, don't be so ridiculous. Of course not.
He would have classified himself at one point as an expert on South Africa. South Africa is now in ruins. The country has been wrecked. And and Peter Hain is never asked about his part in bringing about the destruction of South Africa. As far as...
Well, William, just 1 second. I mean, I would accept that South Africa has got some very significant problems, but on the big point that Peter Hain campaigned on and became famous for, namely fighting apartheid, wasn't he right in principle on that?
He was right in principle.
Right, OK.
But subsequently, the economy of South Africa has been ruined.
Yeah, fine.
So what right has Peter Hain now to pontificate about the economy of the UK versus Europe? And and you have been absolutely right in the past. If you look at the number of German cars that are on our roads, Germans export billions of pounds worth of cars to this country. Do you think the Germans are going to sit back and allow some half-baked deal to be arranged by the EU? They will be clamouring to keep their jobs and their industry.
It's not in the interest, is it, of BMW based in Bavaria, or the champagne makers from that part of France, or the Belgian chocolate makers? It's not in their interest. And William, in a sense, what you've got here is you've got the British government negotiating not with national governments or companies, they're negotiating with the structure of the European Union itself, and they are desperate to keep their system in place. They're desperate, I could add cynically, to keep their wonderful lifestyle in place. So
their gold-plated pensions and their tax-free incomes. It's not tax-free, but it's top-rate tax 16%, so it's not very far away. I mean, so are the Labour Party, William, in your view, has the Labour Party now come to a position where it is a hindrance to Brexit? I think it is, yes.
Absolutely. OK, and that's a bad thing in your view?
It is.
It is.
We should be risk-takers. We should take the risk, and we should go for it.
Right. Well, William, that, I think, is the position that many Brexit voters will take. There are others, of course, who will say, well, actually, we need a long transition. This is the most important thing the United Kingdom, has done in modern times. And if it takes a few years so that we can get it right, then so be it. And that's an argument I'm hearing from many of my Tory Brexit friends who would much rather the Conservative Party were in government than the Labour Party. And I do wonder sometimes where people's loyalties lie on a subject like this. Is it about what's good for the country, or is it about what's good for the party? You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, our brand new edition here on Sundays, exclusively on LBC. It's 10:30. The real political battles on Brexit are about to begin, and the Labour Party has a very clear new position. They're going to try and keep us in the single market and the customs union, at least for the transitional period, however many years that may be. And I'm asking you, is Labour helping or hindering the Brexit process? Let me know whether you approve or disapprove on 0345 60 60 973. Now, one of the things I don't intend to do with this Sunday show is to do newspaper reviews. I know that all the other programmes tend to do them, but I very much take the view that actually newspapers are selling smaller and smaller numbers, and a lot more of us are forming our opinions and getting our news from blogs and goodness knows where else. But occasionally there are standout stories, and I do think that the political editor of the Sunday Times, Tim Shipman, has the most interesting story today, and he makes the point that he says Theresa May is set to approve a politically explosive Brexit bill of up to £50 billion after the Conservative Party conference in October in an effort to kickstart trade talks with the European Union. Now, David Davis, when asked about this, said, we're not going to pay a £50 billion divorce bill. No, Brexit Secretary Davis, I'm sure you won't, but you want us to enter into transitional arrangements for up to about a 3-year period. So if during that 3-year period we were to continue to pay in our gross amount to the European Union, well, that would get us up to nearly 40 billion sterling, before we even started. And I would just say, when people say, we won't pay this bill, we won't do that, please never trust them. So I think, whichever way we cut this, by the time we do leave the European Union, it will have cost a very large sum of money, many tens of billions, and this is not where the public want to be. Some big polling research out this week showing that over 2/3 of you do not want a Brexit bill in excess of 30 billion sterling. Back to the question, the Labour Party, are they helping or hindering the Brexit process? Chris in Richmond.
Morning, Nigel. I mean, I think they are helping the Brexit process. I'm a Liberal Democrat, and I've been frustrated at Labour's kind of what I call a calm receiver position. They've had more than 69 positions, as far as I'm concerned, over the last 2 years.
Yes, I mean, David Davis agrees with that, but didn't put it in quite those terms. But surely, Chris, now, the big change this week is that the Labour Party now has a settled position.
Yeah, and I think it's great. I mean, look, at the end of the day, Nigel, I have to say most Brexiteers, including yourself, are deluding themselves if they think we can leave the European Union in 19 months' time on WTO trade. It is not just about goods and services. It's about regulatory issues. We have no regulatory equivalent of the European Medicines Agency. We don't have one for example, regulating aircraft maintenance. We don't even know if we're going to be in the Open Skies Agreement for airlines. If we leave on WTO rules in 18 months' time with no agreement, or even in 6 months' time, we are stuffed.
Chris, tell me something.
Can I finish, please?
Tell me something.
Sorry.
Chris, let me just ask you one. That's really important. I'm going to stop you there because you're kind of making some very similar points to the ones that Peter Hain was making. Chris, let me ask you, how does the rest of the world manage that isn't in the European Union? How do over 200 countries survive, make their own rules without being governed from Brussels?
I'm not saying that can't happen, Nigel, but you can't create we don't even have an immigration system now. We don't even know how the immigration system would work. We can't even decide who would come in and who would come out. We don't even know what the rules are. We need systems. You can't create an immigration system in 5 months. Ask any IT professional that. Okay, we don't even know who's going to regulate. I work for a pharma company, Nigel. Yeah. Who is going to regulate new cancer medicines in this country? If all the professionals have gone, and most of the best ones are going to go with the EMA, there is going to be no one left. But the other point I wanted to make, and it's really important...
Are you sure, Chris, about that? Now, hang on, let's just do this bit by bit, because it's quite important. I mean, I just saw some figures that were out yesterday showing that manufacturing industry had a significant boost so far this year. Best figures for manufacturing for some years. So surely, if things are going well in many sectors in Britain, people won't leave, will they?
No, it's not about whether. It's talking about who is going to regulate these things in this country.
Right.
So, who is going to regulate? No Brexiteer asked Nick Farage the question the other day, and he still can't answer. You can't answer. No Brexiteers can answer. Who is going to regulate? Which medicines come into this country, and who, for example, if we don't even have an immigration policy, how are our borders going to work?
So this is really a fault of British government more than the Brexit process, yeah?
Well, I completely agree that David Cameron was, frankly, negligent in not having a plan B. I voted for any campaign plan, but he was utterly negligent. That's probably about the only point I would agree with you. But the other point I still want to make is around the Great Repeal Bill. The Labour Party is absolutely right to say that at the moment, if this bill goes through as planned, then ministers can have a European Union law on Monday, and they can change it on Wednesday without any recourse to Parliament. And you were going on about taking back... Is that what you call taking back control, Nigel?
When I talk about sovereignty, Chris, when I said we want our country back, what I was talking about was I don't believe there's such a thing as a sovereignty of Parliament. Because all that Parliament is, it's lent that authority for an up to 5-year period by the electorate. It's the sovereignty of the people that matters, and occasionally there's a big issue like a referendum where we get to choose. Chris, I think let me just be fair, your criticisms of a total lack of planning from the government and dither and delay on these things, I would agree with. As you say, even with a fundamental question like immigration, I haven't got a clue where they're trying to take us. But let me ask you this, Chris. You approve of what the Labour Party is doing this week. Do you approve of it because you think we need more time to get Brexit right? Or are you hoping that because of a long transitional period, we might just change our minds?
Well, I would prefer to change our mind. I would have been happy to stay in the equivalent of an EFTA or an EEA. And even people like Daniel Hannan were saying there's no question in the single market. And I think the single market is fundamental to the way we trade. You cannot unpick 40 years of legislation which is in every single sector. You could pick any sector you like. We are so intricately woven with the European Union that if we suddenly leave that tomorrow with no other rules, we have to have a transition.
Well, Theresa May would argue.
I would like to stay in the European Union, but if the alternative is we pay a membership fee to stay at least in the customs union, and preferably the single market, then great as far as I'm concerned.
Do you know what, Chris? You might just get your way in some form, because I have a feeling that 14 months on from Brexit, whilst the British public are becoming more and more firmly behind Brexit, with something like 70% now saying just get on with it, I think, Chris, Parliament is very much going in the opposite direction. Chris from Richmond, thank you, and some pretty fair criticisms there, actually, of a lack of answers from government on regulatory issues. Mohammed from Aberystwyth in Wales is my next caller. Hello.
Hi, how are you, Nigel?
I'm very well. So, Mohammed, are Labour hindering the Brexit process, or are you cheesed off with all of them?
To be fair, I'm cheesed off with all of them. Realistically, look at it this way: we're being given so many different dates now. I guarantee you, when Theresa May says 2019, we're going to leave. We're not going to leave in 2019. We're going to be there for a while, because at the end of the day, now we're just buckling down to European pressure. We live. That's what's happening, isn't it? Now, I think the caller beforehand, he was moaning about, oh, well, what's going to happen? What's this going to happen? Who's going to regulate it? Like you said, the whole world survives without the European Union.
Absolutely.
We can survive without the European Union. We can trade with the Americans. We trade with the Australians, New Zealand. We can trade with all these countries. But the thing is, we don't have any self-belief in our country anymore. It's not to do with the fact that, people work on nationalist basis. We don't have any nationalism in our country anymore, that we don't believe that we can get anywhere. Look at our country. We've got, 2.5 trillion GDP? We're still a power in this world, but we don't believe it. We can go and we can have trade deals with whoever we want to, but we keep on getting buckled down by the European Union. And why should we get buckled down by them?
Mohammed, I think you've made a brilliant point. It's as if our ruling classes just don't think we're good enough to run our own country, run our own regulations. And what I find amazing, Peter Hain says, I said, well, look, Peter, we sell lots of our motor cars to parts of the world that aren't in the European Union. Yeah, of course we do. That's fine. That'll continue. But so it's as if we can do business with the rest of the world without being in an economic or political union, but we couldn't do business with Europe unless we were stuck inside. I find it really extraordinary, what many would call the tyranny of the status quo. Mohammed, you sound like a fairly resolute Leave voter.
Yeah, no, I did vote Leave. I voted Leave because I saw this country. For example, my forefathers came from Pakistan and India about 50, 60 years ago, right? And in those years, in 60 years, about 2.5 million Pakistanis, Indians, and Bengalis came to this country, right? That's a 60 years period. In the European Union, we had, in 10 years, we had 3 million people. That's not sustainable. It just isn't sustainable. We can't have people coming at such a rate. And not just, when the gentleman before me is saying about, how we're going to control immigration. Well, have an Australian point system. Australia's a point system.
No, Mohammed, I would certainly agree with that. Listen, Mohammed, thank you for your call. Thank you for those observations. And I think for people like Mohammed, who are resolute Brexiteers, I've got a feeling that they're going to need to calm down and sit down a bit over the course of the next few months, because this isn't going to be easy. I get from Alan in Kentish Town by text, hi Nigel, the Labour Party may have changed its mind on Brexit, but has the Labour voter? I think not. I suspect, Alan, in the Midlands and the North, they could pay a very significant price for their new position. Peter in Lancing says to me, I do not care if it takes another 40 years to leave. We are avoiding full convergence with a clearly already hostile federal union. But others on Twitter say that Labour are putting party before country. Well, do you know something? After I'd finished that little pre-record just before the show with Peter Hain, we had a little natter, and I said, well, Peter, I can see you believe in your side of the argument as strongly as I believe in mine. And of course, he said yes. So Peter Hain thinks that it's overwhelmingly in the country's interest to stop Britain leaving the European Union and to overturn, effectively, what happened in that referendum. I don't agree, but that's his position. You're listening to the brand new edition of the Sunday Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC, and it's 10:45. Jeremy Corbyn couldn't have been clearer during the election. It was in the Labour manifesto. I watched the launch. He said, we're leaving the single market. We're ending the free movement of people. He reiterated all of that a few weeks after the general election. I'm guessing a lot of people did vote Labour. A lot of former UKIP voters in the Midlands and the North and South Wales, I think, did vote Labour. They thought, well, hang on, the Labour Party have got the right position. That has all changed. It is a huge victory for people like Peter Hain, who was on the show earlier, and indeed for Keir Starmer. But the question is, by changing the Labour Party's stance to one where they want to stay in the single market and customs union for the transitional period and perhaps for a lot longer beyond that, is that helping or hindering the Brexit process? And I wonder what Justin in Peterfield makes of that.
Well, I tell you what, good morning.
Good morning.
I think we're kind of missing a point here. It's becoming party political.
Very.
It really is pointless becoming party political. There really wasn't a mandate for getting out of the European Union. It was such a close vote.
Really?
Yeah, really. I mean, 2%. That's nothing.
So
That's
had
nothing
it been,
at all.
Justin, had the establishment won, do you think there'd be any prospects of another referendum? None.
I just wish it had never had happened. I wish that David Cameron hadn't tried to destroy the the British Union with his referendum on Scottish independence and with this referendum on getting out. The European Union is going to fall apart. It cannot continue as it is at the moment. In the same way as the Soviet Union fell apart, it gets too fat,
Yep.
it gets too corporate, and it would have been so much better if we'd have stayed in and actually played a constructive part in a reform of the European Union, rather than being the architect of its destruction.
Well, Justin, let me just say this to you. I have been attending the European Parliament since 1999. I can scarcely believe it. But one of the things I've seen and studied over the years is this idea that somehow the British can reform or change the European Union. You know, Mrs. Thatcher, at the absolute height of her powers in the late 1980s, at least electorally in this country, the height of her powers, went to the European Union to persuade them that they were taking political integration too far, and the Coles and the Mitterrands and the Delors completely ignored her and carried on regardless. And Tony Blair, you know, in 2005, and he just won that election. He was riding on the crest of a wave. He was the only European leader, frankly, at that stage with any big international credibility, turned up to do the revolving presidency for 6 months, promised a whole heap of reforms and achieved nothing. So, Justin, you can't say the Brits didn't try to reform it. But where, Justin, I do agree with you completely, is that it is going to fall apart. It doesn't work. It's divided from north to south by a currency that is unsuitable for nearly all of the Mediterranean. And the migrant crisis has now split culturally Europe from east to west. But, Justin, one of the reasons I voted Brexit, Justin, unlike you, from the sounds of it, is I don't want to be on that train that is hurtling towards disaster. I don't want to be on the train, Justin, when it hits the buffers.
Okay, I grant you that, but jumping off a moving train isn't much help either.
Well, it's which was the lesser risk, isn't
Blair
it?
and Margaret Thatcher, they were all had their points, and they tried to influence change. But that was before the collapse of the Greek economy, the collapsing of the Italian economy, the Spanish economy. All these things have happened and are coming to realization subsequent to them. And this is really having to concentrate people's minds. The Germans are doing fabulously well out of the European Union. How many submarines did they sell Greece?
Oh, I know, and all the military equipment, and yeah, I know.
You know, they've done fabulously well. Now, if it was the Deutschmark, they wouldn't be selling a fraction of what they're selling.
No, Justin, you're absolutely right, and we're going to be discussing after the 11 o'clock news whether it's in Britain's interest for Mrs Merkel to get re-elected or not. Justin, thank you for your points. James in Gillingham, the Labour Party are slowing down Brexit, according to David Davis. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Good morning, Nigel.
Good morning.
I don't think they're hindering Brexit. They're giving sense to where there is no sense. At the moment, the government are at sixes and sevens. We had the referendum. People voted the way they did. Mm-hmm. And if you're a Democrat, you have to accept that vote.
Yeah.
I didn't vote to leave. I voted to remain.
Uh-huh.
The government had all these months since the referendum to prepare the groundwork, to prepare their position papers. What did they do? Nothing. The EU, on the other hand, prepared their homework well. Then we get the Prime Minister. Then we trigger Article 50. Still, we haven't prepared anything. We had no position papers written out. Then we get Theresa May calling a general election because she said on the steps down the street that everybody was threatening to vote against it. The Liberals were going to clog up the works and Labour were going to vote against it in the House of Lords. So she needed that general election to give some clarity and to get a majority.
Which actually, James, she didn't need at all, did she? There was almost no prospect of her losing in the Commons of the Lords at that stage.
She did not have to call a general election. I think it was a vanity project.
Mm-hmm.
So she lost her Commons majority. We are where we are where we are. Now, I think you would agree with me that the sensible way to have done it would have been referendum, prepare your position papers, lay them before the House of Commons, get the House of Commons to vote on them, amend them or whatever, then you trigger Article 50. Then if you wanted a general election after that...
But James, we are now where we are. We are now where we are. Is it sensible for Labour to try, and let's say that what they're actually doing is that they've accepted Brexit, but they think it's going to take a few more years to get there. There are other interpretations of their position. Is it sensible to have transitional arrangements? Is it sensible to delay the whole thing for several years, or is it in effect an attempt by the political class to betray Brexit voters?
I think it's a sensible approach that Labour's taken.
Okay.
It's not saying they're not saying we are staying in the EU per se, and that we're not going to take any notice of the Brexit voters. What we're saying is we want to stay in the single market and customs union for as short as it needs to be, or for as long as it needs
and that's the bit, James, I don't trust. James, I've got to let you go. Thank you. Others want to have their say. Derek on Facebook says, the Blairites are winning in the Labour Party. It's Remain at all costs. Well, Derek, certainly the Blairites are having the better of this. And Tony in Chichester, what do you make of the Labour Party's position, and is it helpful?
Good morning, Nigel. No, it's not at all. No, why it can't be? We've had a referendum. Why they can't all stick together as one and toe the line, and then we're in a much stronger position to go to Europe and discuss, from a strong point of view.
Because, Tony, the political class basically never wanted to have this referendum. I mean, David Cameron didn't want to have this referendum. He just felt politically imperiled, so he had to. I think, Tony, from my perspective, what you're seeing now is the establishment fighting back.
But the big problem is people. Is the people in Europe don't know where they stand, and the people that come from Europe working here don't know where they stand. Why on earth, I know what they're going to say, why they can't agree on something to stop these people worrying, and probably the answer is all money comes first.
Yeah.
We won't discuss anything until we discuss money.
Tony, I have to say that when it comes to concessions, I thought the big pitch that Theresa May should have made early on is to say we are going to give absolute assurance that anyone that legally came to the United Kingdom, whatever the numbers, and people like me would argue too many came, but anyone that legally came will be fully entitled to stay. She could have boxed that argument off. She chose not to. So, Tony, do you think that because of politicians doing what they do, that this effectively, from what you're saying, is acting against our national interest?
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, people don't know where they stand.
No, OK.
Brexit or Remain, they just don't know where they stand. I would like to buy a place in France. What am I supposed to do? What can I do?
Well, you can still buy it, although I'm told buying houses in France these days is much easier than selling them. Tony, thank you, and thank you to all our calls. And all I will say is that the gap between public opinion and our political class got a whole lot wider this week, and there may be trouble ahead. Now, we are just 3 weeks away from the German elections, and everything is at stake. Tonight, German Chancellor Angela Merkel and rival SPD candidate Martin Schulz will take part in a TV debate, a big TV debate. Mrs. Merkel's fourth term is what is up for grabs. I want to know from you, do you think it's in Britain's interest for Angela Merkel to stay on as Chancellor? To get involved, call me on 0345 60 60 973. You can text me at 84850. You can tweet Farage and LBC at LBC. And you can keep watching me on LBC's Facebook page now.